There is a kind of woman who doesn't need to compete yet. Men leave behind everything they once considered stable because of her. She doesn't get jealous, doesn't argue, doesn't cling. Sometimes she simply stays silent. And it is that silence that echoes the loudest in a man's mind longer than any plea ever could. This woman is not the other woman. She is a symbol, a living archetype, the enchantress, the one who awakens the forgotten part of a man's soul. She doesn't ask to be chosen. She is the irresistible longing itself. Have you ever wondered why are there certain women who make men lose all sense of reason, even risk seemingly solid relationships? It's not because they are more beautiful or more talented. It's because they activate an emotion that can't be possessed, a deep emotional tension rooted in the unconscious. Carl Jung once said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. Instead, they call it destiny. When a man meets a woman who forces him to confront parts of himself, he never knew the buried sense of adventure, the repressed hunger for freedom, he calls it love. But in truth, it's the awakening of the soul through the feminine image. In this video, you won't find tricks or mind games to steal someone from a relationship. Instead, you'll be invited into the depths of the psyche, where decisions that seem rational are in fact guided by the collective unconscious, by archetypes they cannot name. You'll come to understand why he starts to panic when you stop caring. Why the more complete you feel in yourself, the more incomplete he feels in your absence. And why you don't need to prove anything to become unforgettable. Because you're not merely a woman, you've become a symbol. And when a woman becomes a symbol in a man's psyche, she doesn't need to be chosen. She is the one he cannot afford to lose. If you've ever felt tired of chasing, of doing everything just to keep someone, perhaps you've forgotten the power of the muse within you. It's time you say nothing so he can finally hear the echo of your presence in his own mind. In the next section, I'll show you how to awaken that magnetic absence. Why silent withdrawal is a stronger emotional drug than any confession of love. And how to become an unforgettable presence, not by possession, but by entering his unconscious the right way. Are you ready to dive into your own depth, not just to make him choose you, but to make him confront the soul he's never dared to see? Keep watching. Silence is not absence. In the world of the unconscious, sometimes it's the withdrawal of a person that becomes the loudest echo in someone else's mind. You don't need to scream. You don't need to fight. What you need is to understand the silent mechanism operating beneath a man's seemingly rational decisions. Emotional tension, Sandisha, the unconscious pull of emotional gap. Here's the truth. Men don't leave because they stop loving. They leave when the inner feeling of aliveness fades away. It's not because the other woman wasn't good enough. It's because the sacred space between them has disappeared, what Jung called emotional tension, a silent longing that arises from the unconscious and cannot be controlled. The more stable and predictable a relationship becomes, the more the unconscious retreats. That's when the anima, the inner feminine image in a man's psyche, starts wandering, looking for a new figure, a different energy, someone who makes him feel lack. She doesn't have to be more beautiful, but she carries what Jung called projection, a disowned piece of his psyche that gets unconsciously projected onto you. You become a mirror for something his unconscious craves deeply, someone he can never fully possess. The contrasexual pull. When a man's soul is drawn to the unseen, Jung believed every man carries within him an anima, and every woman an animus. When a man encounters a woman who awakens that inner image, the attraction is no longer under rational control. He doesn't choose you, he is activated by you. Why does your silence confuse him? Why does a fleeting glance from you stay with him? Because you are no longer just you. You are a living anima, a symbol of the soul he hasn't integrated, the part he lost trying to be stable, safe, or right. It's your energy-free sovereign, inviting yet untouchable, that traps his psyche in a loop of attraction, withdrawal, idealization, craving, shadow, and boredom, when numbness isn't anyone's fault. If his current relationship starts to feel dull, it doesn't mean his partner is at fault. It might mean his shadow is awakening. The shadow carries unlived instincts, wildness, repressed vitality, and you somehow become the symbol that reactivates it. Boredom isn't the death of love. It's the unconscious screaming for an unlived part of the psyche. And instead of facing that shadow within, he becomes magnetized by you because you embody what he hasn't dared to confront. If you've ever felt intensely missed, even when you did nothing, maybe you've touched a psychological crack inside someone. You're not the replacement. You're the symbol. This is key. You don't need to take him from anyone. You don't need to outshine anyone or win anything. Because when a woman knows how to withdraw gracefully without demands, without drama, but with soulful presence, she becomes a symbol. And symbols don't need to be chosen. Symbols are unforgettable. You're not a competitor. You're not the other woman. You are the longing that was never fulfilled, the story that was never closed. And in the unconscious mind of a man, unfinished stories always become long-term obsessions. How to hold the symbolic space in his mind. Don't react to his ambiguous signals. Don't try to fill the gap with attention. Allow him to feel the emotional absence of your presence fading. Because in that space of absence, his unconscious starts rewriting the story. He begins to recall the smallest moments. He begins to idealize you not as you truly are, but as the emotionally altered version in his memory. If you've read this far, maybe you've been that woman before, misunderstood too much or too mysterious. I invite you to share in the comments. Have you ever become the animal in someone's psyche? Or have you ever been haunted by a woman you couldn't understand while you couldn't forget? This is not a space for judgment. This is a space to understand each other on a deeper level through the lens of archetypes and Jungian psychology. Let's create a community of healing through awareness, not logic, but the light we shine into the unconscious. In the next part, we'll explore how to use silent withdrawal not as a tool of manipulation, but as a way to create emotional dissonance that triggers idealization. You'll understand the contrast effect, how emotional memory works, and how to become a lasting image, not by strategy, but by soulful presence. There's a Jungian symbol rarely mentioned when we talk about heartbreak, but it silently lives in the unconscious of millions, the lost anima. She's not the ex-girlfriend, not the wife who's no longer around. She's the woman his mind never truly possessed. And precisely because he never fully reached her, she becomes the part of his soul that feels lost. The replay loop, when the mind becomes a movie projector. Imagine the brain like a film projector. Whenever emotions go unfulfilled, the film plays again, not as it truly happened, but as a deeply emotional, color-edited version with unspoken longing. Jung called this compensation of the unconscious. The psyche creates dreams to compensate for incomplete emotional experiences. You don't need to text. You don't need to say a word. If you withdraw at the right moment, his unconscious begins to reconstruct the story like you're a scene that got cut off, a song with no ending, the muse who vanished mid-climax. Why can't he stop thinking about you? It's not because you were better, it's because your connection didn't end logically. The brain, when deprived of emotional closure, replays the memory over and over, trying to make sense of what went wrong. But at that point, it's no longer logic. It's idealized obsession. Jung said memory is not what happened. It is a psychological image colored by emotion. When you withdraw, you don't disappear. You become a reconstructed image, more beautiful, more mysterious, and therefore irreplaceable. The lost anima, becoming the symbol of the unfinished in Jungian psychoanalysis. When a man fails to integrate his anima, the feminine side of his psyche, he looks for that image outside. And when he meets someone who touches that archetypal depth, but the connection can't last, she becomes the lost anima and lives on as a symbol. If you ever created an emotional moment and then vanished without explanation, you might be someone's sweet pain embedded in their unconscious. Archetypal memory. When you're no longer just you inside the replay loop, you're no longer simply you. You've become a symbol part of the archetypal image system within collective humanity. A glance becomes the lover never truly possessed. A smile becomes the muse that lives only in dreams and art. A short conversation becomes a soul ritual never completed. When this happens, he no longer compares you to his current partner. He starts comparing her to the mythologized memory of you. How to trigger the replay effect the right way. Disappear quietly. No anger, no explanation, no drama withdrawal, like mist leaving a trace but not a shape. Give him no emotional closure. Leave just enough gap to make him wonder, did she ever truly want me? Reappear in subtle symbolic ways. A song that brings back a memory. A story post that isn't tagged but feels like a message to him. A color you wore that he once loved, unintentional yet impossible to ignore. When he starts analyzing everything you do, the replay loop has begun. A real experience. She never texted again, but I still remember how she frowned listening to that old song. She never said goodbye, but the moment she stopped replying, I started listening to our playlist again, and I remembered every gesture she ever made. She didn't disappear. She lives inside me like a story that never finished. You see, not with words, but with energy, with an absence that's felt in the soul. If you've ever been the one who withdrew silently, if you've ever felt mythologized not because you tried, but because you lived authentically, share your story. You're not alone. Many women carry within them the archetypes of the muse, the enchantress, the lost anima, without even realizing it. Let the comment section be your space to tell your story, not to be validated, but to be seen through the eyes of the soul. In the next chapter, we'll reach the climax. When he comes back, you'll learn how to hold the unshakable frame, how to make him stay, not just because he misses you, but because he respects the energy you embody. You're not just the one he wants. You are the one he knows he must deserve to keep. Are you ready for that part? When a man returns after a period of withdrawal, it's not always just about regret or missing someone. Often it is part of a much deeper psychological process, transference, the projection of the unconscious. He doesn't return because he misses you, but because a piece of his own soul was activated through you, and now he cannot let it go. Transference, when the unconscious is projected onto another. In Jungian psychoanalysis, transference happens when someone projects their inner world onto another person, not consciously but through instinctive unconscious forces. The other person becomes a vessel through which the psyche begins a conversation, sometimes an intense and emotional one. When you appeared, then disappeared, you didn't just trigger memories. You became a focal point for hidden parts of him, a part of his innocence that once dreamed, a part of his instincts that crave freedom and non-attachment, a part of his soul that may never have met his current wife, who might have covered over those aspects. He returns not to reconnect with you, but to reconnect with those parts of himself through the image you have become. The soul's shadow, the Red Book and the haunting presence in the Red Book, Jung describes profound inner experiences where the shadow of the soul emerges a deep psychic layer carrying symbols and emotions that have never been fully processed. When you withdrew without explanation, you left a space wide enough for that shadow to rise. You became a haunting image, one that refuses to leave his mind, as if the unconscious is crafting a ghost, not a memory, but a symbolic spirit wandering his inner darkness. He can't see you clearly anymore. He sees your shadow, and the more he tries to grasp it, the more it fills his mind, becoming more vivid than reality itself. When he returns, the deeper purpose of transference. So why does he come back? He's seeking to face that shadow of the soul. He's searching for the part of himself he lost reflected through you. Not necessarily because of romantic love, but because he's seeking inner wholeness. You're not just the embodiment of his anima. You are a living symbol and mirror the unconscious is using to send messages. How to hold the unshakable frame. When he returns, that's the moment to hold your frame, not as a power play, but out of respect for his process of transference and to help guide it gently toward integration. Don't over-explain. Keep your words simple and grounded. Let him dig through his own unconscious instead of solving you intellectually. Be warm but maintain distance. Smile. Hold eye contact. But don't rush to hug, reconcile, or fall back into familiar rhythms. Be present like a symbol, not a final reward. Don't accept halfway offers. If he just wants friendship, if he brings back old emotional patterns, gently ask if the man is seeking his shadow in me. Has he truly found him? Let him see you as a journey, not a destination. He may feel curious, emotionally stirred, but you are the awakening, not the end. If he wants more, it must be as a mature man, not someone seeking comfort in old longing. A symbolic story. A woman once shared that when she met her ex-husband again, she didn't demand explanations. She simply invited him for tea, kept a warm yet grounded distance, and asked, "What do you see when you look at me today?" He paused, then replied, "I feel like I'm seeing the woman who once made me forget myself." She said nothing. She smiled. The conversation ended there, but the air opened into a new dimension filled with surprise and quiet reverence. If you've ever experienced someone returning, not because they love you, but because they're seeking a lost part of their soul, share your story in the comments. You are not alone. We are living out Jungian stories, journeys not just of romance, but of soul awakening. Now we enter the climax. When he returns, not just as a man, but with a part of his soul newly awakened. Your role is no longer just to bring him back, but to help him stay with himself through the unshakable frame and guide him into a numinous experience where you become a sacred symbol in his memory. The unshakable frame, mine, the inner posture that cannot be moved. The unshakable frame does not mean being cold, arrogant, or selfish. It's an inner posture of grounded presence where you no longer wait to be chosen but rest in your wholeness, complete, unrushed, and free. Honest, but not dependent. When he says, "I missed you," you smile and gently reply, "That was a beautiful moment." Respectful distance. If he wants to meet and talk more, you might gently suggest, "Maybe we should give it more time so things can fully ripen." Why does this matter? Because a man who returns doesn't want to repeat the past. He wants to feel the truth in the woman before him, a woman who is no longer fragile and needing rescue, but a catalyst for his inner growth. The numinous experience. When soul meets the sacred. A numinous experience is when the soul not only feels deeply, but touches something sacred. It can't be explained by logic. It's a moment that softens the spirit and reminds him, something in me has awakened. If you hold the unshakable frame when he sees you again, he will feel an inner light that wasn't performed but simply is. A quiet energy that makes him say, "I'm looking at a soul that has expanded, not just a memory I idealized." In his psyche, you become the first gateway through which he touches the spiritual essence of his own maturation, something he can't find elsewhere. The eternal dreamer, healing the inner pure eternus. In Jungian psychology, there's the concept of the pure eternus, the eternal boy. A man who never settles, always chasing something more, lost in endless dreams. When he enters this cycle with you, he might awaken the poor, craving wildness, novelty, passion. But if you stay grounded in your frame, he learns to bring the pure home, realizing he doesn't need to wander because he can reflect himself in a woman of depth. You don't stabilize him by changing. You stabilize him by staying true so he no longer chases fantasy, but starts to truly mature. How to create a positive psychological shock. Speak softly but with meaning. Avoid lines like, "I still love you," or "I can't live without you." Instead say, "Every moment we meet is part of a story I'm writing." That tone makes him feel your wisdom, your stillness, not pain or neediness. Trigger the numinous from time to time, a line of poetry, a silent gaze, a spontaneous smile during the encounter, enough to make him realize she's not ordinary in my heart. Redefine the structure. If he wants to resume the relationship, don't rush. Gently ask, "What are you returning for?" This question lets him realize you're not a solution. You're the journey, a story of sacred stillness a woman shared. He returned under the moonlight. I said just one thing. "It's beautiful tonight." He said nothing. But he didn't try to take me home either. He just sat next to me. Then he said, "You are the reason I feel I should stay right now in this moment." Just one sentence. No grand declarations. But in that moment, they merged not as ex-lovers, but as awakened souls. If you've ever experienced a moment where someone stood still in silence, not because of drama, but because something sacred passed between you, share it. You may have given someone a numinous experience, an internal memory that cannot be copied or explained. Let the comments be a space where you write about the meaningful silence you once shared, what it felt like when a glance touched the soul instead of the mind. In Jungian analytical psychology, the peak of every inner journey is not about winning love or holding on to someone. It is the moment you face the self, the symbol of a whole being no longer divided, no longer needing to be chosen, because you have already chosen yourself. Now you who have walked through the wound of being forgotten, endured the purposeful silence, and held an unshakable frame amidst emotional storms, have reached the deepest transformation, from someone longing for love to the source of love itself. The self, the complete image beyond the need to be chosen. Carl Jung said that a person is only truly free when they no longer act out of the ego's reflex, that small self which craves control, approval, and fears abandonment. Instead, when you arrive at the self, you no longer manipulate to be loved. You no longer react when you're abandoned. You no longer turn love into a battlefield or salvation. You become a symbol not because someone loves you, but because you are now the guide through your own soul's labyrinth. Inner alchemy, turning instinctual chaos into spiritual gold. Jung called this journey a form of ancient spiritual alchemy. You start with raw material, a woman hurt and confused by being left behind. Then you endure the fires of solitude, longing, waiting, and doubt. You learn to be silent at the right moments, withdraw at the right level, and observe yourself in the mirror of your reactions. Eventually, you extract your essence from the cycle. No more manipulation, no more performance, no more unconscious hoping. And it is here that the gold of the soul begins to shine. When you no longer need to be chosen, you become unforgettable. The paradox is this: when you stop trying to make someone choose you, you become the only one they cannot forget. Why? Because people forget what they've fully possessed. But the symbol of a woman who is independent, profound, and radiant in her own essence can never be fully claimed because she belongs to no one. At that point, he stops chasing dopamine and begins to revere a living symbol you. A symbolic story, from wounded maiden to inner high priestess. She once stayed up all night waiting for a text. She used to edit every message so she didn't seem too eager. She silently compared herself to that other woman, thinking she wasn't fun enough, not stable enough. But then, instead of trying to heal him, she began to heal herself. Instead of trying to be remembered, she learned to hold the memory for her own soul. She wrote, she painted, she planted trees. She stood alone in the rain without needing anyone to shelter her, and she shined silently. He came back, but she was no longer the same. She was someone who knew loss but no longer feared losing. She understood the power of distance and how presence with stability was the greatest force of all. Have you walked this path? Have you ever gone from being someone who always needed reassurance to someone who could step back and see the full picture? The comments are your sacred space today. Write about: how did you overcome the need to be chosen? Where are you now on the journey from left behind to choosing yourself? You are not alone. This is a shared journey of awakened souls. This final chapter is not about how to make him choose you like a prize. It's about how you become a mature symbol, a living version of the self, so that anyone who meets you must face themselves. Deep love is no longer possession. It is present, soft, deep, and whispering like a Jungian vision in a dream. If you've made it to these final lines, you've walked with me through an inner journey, a series of soul-level experiences where every step has led you to a deeper awakening. And now, as this journey closes, a new door opens, not just to love, but to your own wholeness. You are not merely someone to be chosen. You are someone who chooses herself. That is the most subtle and sacred message of this Jungian path. You no longer need to chase after anyone to validate your worth. Because when you become your full integrated self, you naturally become worthy of love. Not because you tried harder, but because you lived in alignment with who you truly are. A summary of the journey: emotional tension. You learn to hold on to the mystery, letting him feel the missing space that his unconscious cannot ignore. The replay loop and the lost anima. You allowed him to transform a memory into a symbol, letting him see you through the lens of the soul, not just the past. Transference in the Soul Shadow Red Book. You became the reflection of his inner self, and he returned not just from emotion, but from an unconscious need to meet a hidden part of himself. The unshakable frame and the numinous experience. You became a source of inner light, a sacred presence that didn't just call him back, but made him revere you as a mirror of his own soul. The self and inner alchemy. You no longer needed to be chosen by anyone because you had already chosen yourself, whole, calm, untethered. You didn't change him, you changed yourself, and he awoke the moment his eyes opened to see that. If you once believed that love was just a fleeting emotion, know this: love can be a sacred alchemy, where you are the alchemist, your heart is the furnace, and every experience, even pain and abandonment, becomes the raw material for your soul's refinement. Once you were a mix of fear, desire, and emptiness. Now you are the awakened state, soft yet sovereign within. The spiritual gold isn't winning someone. It's the glorious victory of meeting yourself fully. The magic of no longer needing to be chosen. Here's the paradox. The moment you stop trying to make someone choose you, you become the one they can never forget. You are no longer an option. You are an embodied value, a woman who is whole, radiant, and independent in her essence. And when that energy begins to shine, a man doesn't come back just because there's still a chance. He comes back because he knows you no longer belong to anyone. You belong to yourself. Responding with love, but from a place of sacred responsibility. You don't have to chase. You don't need to slam the door shut either. You only need to speak from the humility of someone who has awakened inwardly. I'm here grounded and whole. If you wanted to come closer, bring the truth of who you are. If you've found the part of yourself that has never lived before, then perhaps we can walk together. And if he can't do that, you'll still be okay, because you've lived fully, no longer needing anyone's choice to know who you are. You, the one reading this, may have stood in the space between being abandoned and wanting to be loved again. So share in the comment. Have you ever become a symbol in someone's life? When was the moment you realized, I don't need to be chosen? I choose myself. Let this space be a sanctuary. Like, share, subscribe, so you'll always have a place to return to, a quiet, deep space where you are seen not only through your power to attract, but through the way you've chosen to face yourself.